Kia ora everyone, my name is Zach. I love rugby. Welcome back to Hakatime Rugby. Today I'm joined by Mr. Unbiased Rugby. Don, how are you doing?
I'm well, and yourself?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks a lot for joining today.
No, absolute pleasure. Really thankful that you reached out.
There's been a lot of talk in the media recently about will the Springboks join the Six Nations, will they not? So, and it really seems to be, blowing somewhat out of control, I think, from a media perspective. So today's discussion, really interesting discussion. Not only will the Springboks join the Six Nations, but overall from a Southern Hemisphere perspective, it's a good opportunity for us to reflect, look at what we're doing well, and also question where we're heading. Because I do think a lot of this conversation comes up around the commercial viability of the Southern Hemisphere product. And that's generally why, this topic comes up once a year about South Africa potentially moving to Europe. So there's a lot of inflection I think we can do, and that's where we'd like to have some of that discussion, is what can SANZAAR do to really improve competitiveness here. So let's kick things off right off the bat, Don. Overarching thoughts. Will the Springboks join the Six Nations? What do you think?
No, I don't think it's ever going to happen. I just don't see it. The reason why the Six Nations is such a good competition is because the fans can easily travel from one country to another. It's very close. It's very affordable. I think the furthest they have to go is Italy, and that's a couple of hours away. The other overriding thing is, where would they play the games in South Africa? At that time it's like extremely hot still. You can't play in Durban. It's physically impossible. I just don't see it happening. And looking at how CBC's actually bought into now the Six Nations, they've invested that huge amount of money. I just don't see it going up to 7 teams. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's also talk around contractuals. I know that there's some contractual obligations that push us out to 2025 anyway. So any discussion is along, it's quite a far way into the future. Also, I've read this week that a lot of the players are not supporting both European players as well as South African players, because ultimately it just means more games, and player management really is a topic of conversation right now. Player welfare, player management, player workloads, and introducing more games. I mean, it's a huge impact on the players in particular. So, yeah, the viability, I'm not sure if it's truly viable that this would go ahead. And saying that, it seems to come up once every year, I'd say. Every time the Six Nations is on, there seems to be an article written by a European scribe around South Africa joining. This one seems to have a little bit more behind it, in that, potentially there are conversations that are being had, but this could also just be good negotiating tactics from a South African perspective. Really test the market and play them off that way. So and at the end of the day, we all want a fair and equitable result. So, if South Africa's testing the market with a view to negotiate stronger in SANZAAR, then so be it. That's the way these things go.
I think like if you're a player and you've got a manager, obviously you want to spread these kind of stories out there that you're going to be bought by this club and bought by that club. It pushes the value of the player up, even if it's just flash in the pan or whatever. Just quick talking. I just don't see it as it's not a viable option. And I know the time zones are the same, but it's different. One's winter, one's summer. 9-hour flight, 10-hour flight. I just don't see it happening.
Yep, I agree. I don't think it's viable overall. So let's just dive a little bit deeper. I mean, we'll go one at a time, but what do you think of the pros to joining the Six Nations for South Africa?
I think it's big cash. I think it's the pound. Obviously, I was doing some figures for this actual show, and the amount of money that's in the Northern Hemisphere, the Southern Hemisphere pales in comparison when it comes to actual funding. Like if you just take England on its own, I think England on its own has the same revenue as Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa basically combined. So the money's up north, and that would be the overriding thing for it. Wouldn't be player management, it wouldn't be anything like that. It would just be money.
Yep. I mean, it would be, I was thinking about this, and I'm a big fan of the Rugby Championship, but seeing a little bit of extra spice in the Six Nations would be quite exciting. I'd say from a product perspective, that really does build that Six Nations product, Seven Nations, if that was the case. I mean, seeing South Africa regularly compete in that tournament would be extremely exciting.
I also think the South African style of rugby might be a little bit closer to Northern Hemisphere rugby than any of the other Southern Hemisphere sides.
Yep.
It's the kick pace, it's the pressure game. So it would be an easy fit, but yeah, I just think logistically, it would be an absolute nightmare.
Yep. Well, let's move on. What do you think of the cons to joining the Six Nations?
I think player management would be the biggest thing. Would it really actually save South African rugby? Would we still be able to keep our players here in this country? I still don't see that happening. There would be more funding, but I just don't think it's enough to. There's so many more things that South Africa needs to spend their money on. You're talking women's rugby, sevens, especially growing at a grassroots level. I just don't see the money being enough for that. So, what's the point?
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think as well that the North really has quite a strong hold. Well, there's what I'll say is there's quite a good balance at the moment between overall world control, particularly with the IRB. So it's quite well balanced. I just fear that shift will really change the dynamic of world rugby, and certainly focus a lot more towards European rugby, and that may impact growth of the game overall, I think. I know a lot of these. Yep.
Sorry, Karen.
No, I was going to say a lot of these. There's been talk, and I know the All Blacks, New Zealand Rugby, are guilty of it as well. But there's a lot more focus on commercial success than there is in the growth of the game. And I just think right now we've got a reasonable balance from a decision-making perspective at the international level between Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. That disruption could really impact investment and Tier 2 rugby. And if you start looking at player management issues, then what's the point in playing some of the smaller tier nations for some of these bigger nations? I just wonder if it will really impact growth of the game.
I don't. Look at the moment. If you look at the voting at the last Rugby World Cup, where everything was geared for South Africa to take the next World Cup at 2023, and we didn't get it because of the voting. At the end of the day, each Tier 1 nation has 3 votes, and there's more of a balance up north than there is down south. So, if South Africa starts to go north, then we start voting more with the north, and then we'll never have a Rugby World Cup in the Southern Hemisphere ever again.
That's right. That's right. Any other cons you want to touch on before we move on?
It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you look at it, what is it? 8 out of the last 9 World Cups are won by Southern Hemisphere teams. So I'd like to keep that going. Okay, let's move on then. So what next for SANZAAR? I mean, ultimately, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is a commercial discussion. So we need to take a good, hard look at what is happening in Southern Hemisphere rugby, what's working well, what's not working well. I think we can all acknowledge that with dwindling viewership, with lower than expected crowd at certain games, it's becoming a bit of an issue. So it's certainly a case that SANZAAR needs to improve in a number of different ways. So what do you think? What next for SANZAAR to truly be competitive here and try and push commercial viability?
I know that we've had quite a few discussions about this, and I think we both have not similar solutions, but we're coming at it from completely different directions. And so for me, the biggest product for South Africa, just thinking from a South African point of view, the biggest product for South Africa should be maybe the Currie Cup or something like that. Real grassroots, not grassroots, it's one higher than grassroots, but it's really to build that kind of tribalism again where, we used to, 10 years ago, we'd have 50, 60,000 people at a Currie Cup game. And now we have 10,000 people at a Super Rugby game. So it's to actually start building and start marketing that tier of South African rugby. So, we start generating our own income for ourselves, and we start generating the merchandising. There's a whole load of things that we can do just at that level. And I think the same should be for New Zealand, and the Mitre 10 should be an even more entertaining competition. You know, I was watching in South Africa. We have a varsity cup, so it's all the universities that play against each other, and they have quite strange rules. So they have super subs, you know, people that can come on for 5 minutes and then go off, and it's a real different way of watching the game, and it's still rugby. It's still rugby union, but it just has a few little tweaks to it. You know, they have, I think, super 5 minutes or something like that, and you know, power plays and things like that. You know, it just makes it a little bit more exciting. Maybe bringing that T20 kind of experience into rugby.
Yep.
And you know, maybe that could be something that could be looked at. And I'm looking more at from a tribalism point of view. How can we create the upswell of people to actually start watching the game here?
I think you know, one point we probably agree on is Australian rugby certainly needs to
Big time
start winning again. I think when I was looking at obviously the market opportunity there in Australia, you know, significant revenue opportunities available, and when the Wallabies were highly successful late 90s, early 2000s, you know, rugby was up there as, you know, third best sport in Australia, second best sport in Australia, and a lot of corporate money came in behind that to really push the brand. It became somewhat of a you know, a corporate friendly sport to really market in Australia. But a lack of success has probably diminished that a bit. And that's certainly a big impact to revenue overall for Southern Hemisphere. You know, so, and I was thinking, how really can you bring viewership back in Australia? And the only thing I can think of is they have to start winning again. Right? There's really no other way. Success breeds success, as they say. So a strong Australia is something we all need.
I think just look at South Africa as an example. The viewerships have been dropping for years and years and years. And I think from last year, there's been a huge, big upswing in not only sponsorship, people going to the games, people are more interested, they're more engaged online because their main brand is actually doing well. And it's exactly the same with All Blacks. The main brand for New Zealand is the All Blacks. You know, that drives all the growth in New Zealand rugby. The same happens with the Springboks. That should drive all the growth in South African rugby. And it has to be the same for the Wallabies. The Wallabies have to start winning.
Yep. I mean, how you solve that's a much bigger conversation. But with Dave Rennie coming in, he's a bit of a no-nonsense guy, so he'll at least sort things at the top. But the issue is really grassroots. I can tell you personally, living here in Australia, that you know there's not a lot of support at the grassroots level. And with the changes in rules, I mean, a lot of parents are you know, a little bit against putting their kids into rugby these days. You know, mainly because of the injury factors. And there was a rule came out in rugby league that kids up to the age of 13 would not get any awards, win medals or winning awards. And there's no tackling until 13. And I remember, you know, tackling as a 4 or 5 year old, you know, back in the day, so running around tackling sort of people. But you know, there's a real change in the game, and there's a lot of fear from parents around young kids playing rugby these days, which is a real shame. I think, you know, if kids are taught the right way, then, you know, safety improves for sure.
Well, I was watching and I actually mentioned this last year. I was watching a Waratahs game last year, and it was the tackle technique of one of the props. Now, props should know how to tackle, and literally he was going across the face of the knees, and you know, and I just twice in a row, and it just shows that it's an ingrained wrong tackle technique. You know, he just wasn't trained as a kid to tackle the right way, and that comes from grassroots. You get taught when you're 12, 13 how to tackle. You know, head to the side, in the midriff, but head straight across the knees. And I just thought, wow, that is the most dangerous thing I've ever seen from a tackle technique. And you know, that's really off the topic, but I can understand why parents would start worrying about their children.
Yep. No, we're taught to tackle cheek to cheek in New Zealand. Okay, so we agree strong Wallabies is needed to improve the product overall. I think that's a definite. In terms of expansion, where do you stand on expansion? Should SANZAAR expand or should it not expand?
I think it has to expand. I think it just has to. There is no other way around it. You know, I think the New Zealand market's very saturated. The South African market still probably doesn't have the same kind of buying power as the other Australia and New Zealand. Australia, they're just not doing that well. Argentina probably has the same kind of problems as South Africa. So it has to expand. But, you know, we need to expand constructively. You know, I think including a Fiji sounds great. Yes, it'd be loved to have Fiji on the side, but do they actually bring something to the table, or do they take something away? And I'm not trying to pick on Fiji or anything, because I think they're a great side, but you know, they'd be diminishing the resources, and we need to be in a situation where we're actually building up the resources.
Yep. I think if you look at a team like Japan, they obviously make sense. The market's big enough.
Exactly.
They've proven their ability at the top level. I think from a market opportunity perspective, they would be the most viable option. But what I'm not a fan of, and you touched on this, is expansion for expansion's sake. I think that, you know, trying to dilute what is a relatively successful professional league there, I think would be a mistake. You know, there's been a rush to really expand Super Rugby. I think the answer for Super Rugby is actually to reduce number of teams and reduce number of games. And having a secondary option within the wider SANZAAR umbrella, if Japan was to come in with the Japanese top league, is good for everyone. Then you've got two great professional leagues operating, you know, under the same banner. So, I mean, if Japan were to come in, I would say it's not an expansion. Expansion certainly for the Rugby Championship, that's fine, but expanding the club level would be a mistake. I think you keep the Japanese top league as it is. You reduce the number of teams in Super Rugby.
It's also, I think the structures are completely different. You know, I think the Japanese systems are a lot more corporate. So it's all owned by companies. So they're employees of the company. Where Super Rugby, you know, it's the franchises. It's a completely different kind of structure and system. So I agree with you there 100%. And I'd say it'd be wonderful to have both competitions available, because they play at similar times, but they still also play at different times. So, you know, there could be a lot of cross-pollination from not only supporters, but players, things like that. So I think Japan makes sense from a rugby championship point of view.
Yeah. I like the name SANZAAR as well. I think it's the, it's the best we can do.
Come up with something a little shorter. Yeah.
That's right. We might have to go away from this habit of just adding letters to SANZAAR.
Yeah. We might have to.
Let me know if there's any ideas people can think of a replacement for SANZAAR. So Japan coming in, that makes sense. Super Rugby, let's talk about that. So, you know, there's been a real race to expand Super Rugby. We're now getting it a lot earlier in the year. Strange to see Super Rugby in January, I thought, you know, and a lot more games. So, you know, briefly touched on this, but I think the answer is to reduce number of teams and reduce number of games. And even if player management is an issue, then doing these trips to Argentina, South Africa, from a New Zealand perspective, Argentina, South Africa, it's a big commitment on players. It's a big commitment on teams. Huge financial burden. I just think we can get a lot more strategic around what Super Rugby looks like, so it's more friendly for players and spectators.
No, I agree with you. Looking at your ideas that you sent across, you know, literally go back down to about 10 teams. I think in your one mail you were saying 9 teams. I agree with that. It was quite strange. I was watching History of Rugby. I don't know if it was a 6-part series that was on a paid channel over here, and they were talking about why Southern Hemisphere Rugby was so strong in the 90s and the early 2000s. Was because we had the TV deals. You know, the Northern Hemisphere didn't have the TV deals, and we had the money. So we all talk about how great Super 10 was and Super 12, but we didn't forget to realize that, you know, we had all the money at that stage. So there's a reason why we had the good players, because we could afford to pay for. We could pay for them. So that's one thing to consider. I like your idea of going back down to 10, but I'm thinking maybe taking it more like a European kind of championship, as opposed to a you know, we just have the same set teams all the time. Maybe top 2-3 teams of the Currie Cup, they win the Currie Cup, they can go through and play the following year, or something to that effect. Because then what's nice about having that is you could make it this year, but if you don't manage both sides, then you could be fallout the following year, and then you've got another team that come in. It just makes it a little bit more exciting.
Yep. Well, there's a carrot at the end. It also helps with expansion in a way that is not just overloading, competitions and teams. It means you're keeping a relatively concise structure, but you're giving opportunities for other clubs to come through and be a part of it.
I don't think we can really have a draft system. I just don't think it would work with the different kind of countries and stuff like that. But if the Crusaders want to make Super Rugby, then they've still got to go win the Mitre 10, or they've still got to be in the top 2-3 positions there. So they've got to manage both sides. So they've got to manage their player load. They can't play all the players all the time. It might be a bit of a better way of doing it. It makes Super Rugby maybe a bit more of a premium product. Yep,
I'd agree with that. Jordan Clark, Super Rugby needs to allow privatisation like Northern Hemisphere, problem solved. I do agree with that. I think there's far too much control, particularly in New Zealand at the national level. There's been a huge debate around player management, around having All Blacks unavailable. You've got, for example, the Blues obviously went down against the Chiefs, and then you get photos of Beauden Barrett, at the Super Bowl, enjoying himself, taking time off, and it just struck a few fans the wrong way, And this conversation, and he was wearing a Chiefs jersey as well, the NFL version of the Chiefs, so that just seemed to rub fans a little bit the wrong way. But that's a good example where the clubs just certainly don't have enough control over their players. They're dictated a lot by the New Zealand Rugby Union. And really encouraging investment in Super Rugby is very important, I think, to help promote the game, to help influence corporate sponsorship as well, to really push it, So I think we need to find that right balance. I do think the Northern Hemisphere teams probably have it a little bit too far towards privatisation. We've certainly seen some issues in recent years around that. Southern Hemisphere teams, New Zealand in particular, has it far too far away from privatisation.
They're very, very, very central. I was looking. I think I sent you a mail on this. There was a show on the TV, and it was the Lions were playing on the field, and all the kids were around there, and they were asking the kids, why are you here? No, we're here to see Malcolm Marx, and it just makes the people want to see. You go watch your team, but you want to go see the X Factor stars. That's what you go there to watch. You don't go watch the Blues not last year. You go watch the Blues to watch Sonny Bill Williams do an offload and go chat to everyone afterwards. That's why you go to the games. And if those players aren't there, then it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Then you're a real diehard fan.
Well, like me, unfortunately. I agree. I think that has to be a fundamental rule at Super Rugby level, is that the best players have every opportunity to play in every game. That makes sense, obviously, from injuries, etc. But really, that should be the focus, and that should be a commitment made to the franchises. Is that from a rugby union perspective, we're allowing as much as we can that the best players are on the field.
I was thinking about this a few years ago. Something having like a player passport. I don't know what to call it, but literally we know a player can only play 20 games a year before he starts having serious injuries, head knocks, things like that. So he literally has a player passport. He has 20 games he can play for the year, and that gets managed that way. And if he plays internationals, if he plays local games, or if he plays Curry Cup or whatever, that it gets added to that total, and it's a way of protecting the player. Even if he goes and plays up north, or he plays for the All Blacks, that can be managed.
Yep.
So like a player passport. So then they don't become a commodity. They actually become, a human.
Yeah. And then they need to stop making these blanket rules. I think it's it's proven to be, it's certainly not a good fit. Anton Leonard-Brown played the most minutes last year from an All Blacks perspective. If you look at all forms of rugby, he played about 1,700 minutes of rugby. But David Havili played 2,100 minutes of rugby. When you include Mitre 10 Cup, when you include Super Rugby, so that just shows. It's certainly got to be player by player specific. I think blanket rules based on international minutes, not quite the right model.
No, I agree. I think we watched the same show where they were talking about that. So obviously with players that wouldn't, like there was Saki Noholos and people like that, who actually, it was detrimental to their career for not playing.
Yep. I also think, and back to this topic of expansion, I'd like to see a return to some of the, traditional rivalries. A lot more focus on traditional rivalries. We spoke briefly on this, but having a biannual tour of South Africa, for example, from an All Blacks perspective, 2 games in South Africa. The following year we do 2 games in New Zealand, and it becomes almost like a throwback to some of the old tours. The tours of old days. Yeah, because you think about. I remember when the first time the All Blacks won a tour in South Africa. I remember Sean Fitzpatrick hunched over on his knees. Oh, it was huge. It was. We probably remember it for different reasons, but I just remember that whole feeling of it's hard to win a tour in South Africa. We've finally done it. What a victory, and that's some of the, these old formats really did work for a reason. So I don't know why we abandoned them.
I think we are spoilt at the moment. There's just too much. We know we're going to play home and away. Probably from a financial viability, that's what they think it's the right idea. But I think if you haven't seen the Springboks for a year and you've got to wait another whole year to watch them, it makes it a bit more exciting when they actually come through.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I really like that format, and I think it would work with Australia. I like the idea of having the 3 different trophies: Bledisloe, Freedom Cup, and Mandela Plate. Yeah. I think it's a really good idea. So because then we're skipping a year always.
Yep. The Bledisloe Cup, I think they play too many games now. It used to be 2 games. To win the Bledisloe Cup, you had to win both games that year. That was the format. Then they've moved it to 3 games. Unfortunately, that's been a bit one-sided in recent years. But I like the idea. 2 games, you've got to win. If you want to dethrone the champion, you've got to win both games. Yep, you've got to win both games.
I think that's the way to go. I think just make it a little bit more exciting. Before Tri Nations, we didn't play very often. Maybe every 3-4 years, and there was an excitement about it. So I just don't think the home and away format is the right way to be going.
Yep, I'd agree.
I think you were saying in your mail, including Japan, and play once.
Yep, that's right. Yep, that's right. Play once. I think I do think the Six Nations has got that format right. You alternate years in terms of home and away, but during the tournament you only play teams once. And I think that's
you got one chance.
That's one chance. Yeah, it's that scarcity really promotes. It generates more drama and excitement.
This last rugby championship. Yeah, I know it was a shortened format, but I enjoyed it. It was quick, few weekends. We watched the game, done, finished. Yep,
that's right. An expanded rugby championship with 5 teams. Yeah, I think one game each. You've got to win the games. You've got to win your games to obviously be successful. So I think that's certainly. I was going to say that's certainly a model the Northern Hemisphere have, right?
No, I agree 100%.
Anything else you want to touch on this? Anything else SANZAAR needs to focus on? Any other expansion opportunities?
I think we still need to grow the game. There are a few countries that are being left behind. I did like your idea of having a second tier rugby championship and having a promotion relegation game. I actually prefer, it's a big one. This is a big one, but in the Premiership, they have automatic relegation. So, which is, that's big. So you're the bottom team. That's it. You relegated. The top team from the league below, they get promoted. Now that makes it. That's do or die. You don't get that. You don't get that one last game where you can maybe save yourself. This is. You come last, that's it. You've got another whole year before you can come back again.
Yeah, interesting.
You've got to have big cojones if they want to do something like that. So,
Yeah.
but I do think I liked you were talking Fiji, Tonga, United States, Canada.
Yeah. Well, let me bring that up. We'll bring that up.
Yeah.
A quick chat on
I
that.
thought it was a really interesting idea that you had there. Oh, shit.
Let's just see how that's coming across. Here's my idea for an expanded rugby championship. 2 tiers. So obviously 5 teams in each tier. But bringing in, the second tier. The Pacific Nations Cup is already established and already, working well to a degree. But, there would be a lot more excitement if there is some stakes on the line, as we just said. So having a promotion relegation format into the rugby championship, I think would work really, really well. Give great opportunities for teams to really develop and come through to a top tier championship. Now, this would not be considered, I guess, under the SANZAAR umbrella. If we're looking at this kind of approach, it's a full rethink of really world rugby, because this is result in significant change. And I know we've all spoken about moving towards more of a global type calendar for rugby and all moving towards a global, approach. This gets us a little bit closer, but I just think it supports development in some of the geographical areas that are close, I guess, in the Southern Hemisphere region. Gives an opportunity for developing nations like Canada and the United States Pacific teams to have pathway through top level. But I also think there's big opportunity for America in the coming years. I know it's been spoken about a lot, about the development opportunities in America, but if they're able to win a Rugby World, to host the Rugby World Cup 2027, they're already on the back of reasonable growth based on Sevens rugby, Major League Rugby. I'm now watching a bit of that, and then focusing on that. So there's certainly a lot of talk happening in the US, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the not too distant future they are stronger. I won't say all the way there, but I'll say they could be stronger in the future.
No, that would be great. I think the purchasing power of the States is just absolutely astronomical, and compared to the rest of us. But my only concern would be is obviously a lot of these countries like Fiji, Tonga, they get most of their money from World Rugby. Would they want to jeopardize that by aligning themselves with SANZAAR more as opposed to with World Rugby? I was looking at the last vote. We were talking about the vote of the World Cup, and Africa voted against South Africa, and because Africa obviously have one vote, and they voted against it hosting in South Africa because they would have got more money if it was hosted in France. So it's a tough one, because obviously Fiji and Tonga, they'd be I wouldn't say they'd be risking that money, but it would be a complete paradigm shift of how they actually operate at the moment.
Yeah, it is a very, very difficult one. I mean, you want teams ultimately to be self-sufficient, from a revenue perspective, but it's clear that in small nations, it's very difficult to have that kind of viewership and that kind of commercial support. So I don't know if those are easily solved problems.
The last point that you brought up, I thought was very interesting, and I've been thinking about this for a while. It's about sharing resources. It's about there's a lot of money we've got a high performance centre in Stellenbosch. I'm sure there must be a high performance centre in New Zealand. We're actually all spending this money individually on these high performance centres, on tactics, player management, player welfare, research and development, these kind of things. And if we start putting that all together and sharing the data, it's just managing what we have a little bit more smarter.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I'd like to see that not just at the player level, but at the coaching level and also at the administration level. I do think there needs to be more knowledge sharing at the top level. I've seen a number of examples where administrative issues have stifled growth in certain countries. And, it's certainly a topic that's talked a lot about, particularly with the Pacific nations. So I think some kind of support it may not be cash injections, but sharing of skills, I think, would be a huge step forward for some of those developing nations. I think the answer is not always throw money at the problem,
No, it's throw knowledge, and it's player welfare is the same wherever you are. It's about diet, it's about exercise, it's about not playing so many minutes, it's about full rehab after the game. So this is the kind of information that should be shared amongst all of us.
Yep.
And say we had a high performance place, and Stellenbosch is a lovely place, by the way. It's absolutely magnificent, and any rugby player would love to go spend a couple of months there. Nice big university town, lots of wine. I think they'd love it. So, and that could be like the central rehab or the central place where, this part of rugby gets done. So a certain part gets done in New Zealand, and we share that information. It's not like we're sharing tactics and how to win on the field and things like that. That's why you have coaches, but we're sharing the sundry things around it.
Yeah, techniques.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah. Wouldn't
it be nice that because we're sharing this stuff, all that kind of the physios and everything are available to a Tonga?
Mm.
They actually have those kind of people that are around them.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be great. Moggy raises a good point. No Uruguay. Well, they certainly showed they should be involved in the conversation after the last World Cup. So, I must admit I don't know a lot about Uruguayan rugby other than their captain gives a very passionate speech. But they're certainly a team that should be considered. They've shown that they obviously coming through. Great win in the World Cup against Fiji. They're a team that should be considered.
No, I agree.
Okay, anything else you want to say on this? What else can SANZAAR do? I think we've covered most ends of this discussion.
I think SANZAAR just need to talk to each other. I think the member countries need to talk to each other and figure out a plan going forward. I think it's time to be a bit more transparent and come up with some constructive ideas of actually going forward.
Yep, I agree. Before we go, I'll put you on the spot. Who wins the Six Nations? I'll answer it.
Look, I'm liking the way that the French are playing. I'd like to see how they play their next game against Wales or something like that. I'm really liking the way that Ireland are playing. I think they've got a lot of freedom, and I think they might take it. I have a strong feeling.
Yeah, I think you could be right. I mean, I originally picked Wales to win. I just thought the way that the Irish handled the Welsh, very, very dominant. They look very, very dangerous. I mean, what's becoming clear to me in the Six Nations is you've got to win away from home. So that's going to be the big question next is can France win away from home, and can Ireland win away from home?
I think Ireland just have to win one more game, I think, and they've almost got it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we may see it decided the next games. We've got England taking on Ireland at England at home, and we've got Wales versus France. So, in a way, win there could count a long way towards winning the tournament.
Yeah, I think you're actually right. It actually could be decided this morning. That's what makes it so exciting. By round 3, you actually know we've got a winner.
That's right. And anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, who do you think is going to win Super Rugby? That's a big question I'd like to ask.
There's 4 teams that are starting to identify themselves. There's 4 teams. So Moggy, now that Wales have disappointed Ireland, it is. I think that's the 3rd time you've changed teams, Moggy. So much with me as well. I've done exactly the same. So in terms of Super Rugby, I think the top teams are starting to identify themselves. So certainly the Stormers. I'll still put the Sharks in there despite the result today. Mm-hmm. I still think that getting 1 away win in New Zealand is a pretty good result. So from 2 games. So to go back 1 win, that's a great result. I think their rush defence looks particularly dangerous. Hurricanes impressed me, but you've still got the Chiefs and the Crusaders there as well. So there's probably 5 teams that are really starting to separate themselves. Look, I'm not going to go past the Crusaders to do it again. I think if I was to put money on the line, I'd say Crusaders. They tend to get better throughout the season. They've certainly got to fix some issues in the forward pack, but overall, I think they've certainly got the history and the personnel to do it if they come right at the right time into the season.
I put in my magic. I looked at my 8 ball and I said the Chiefs. So I think the Chiefs are going to take it. So, but yeah, I agree with your teams. I might actually I haven't watched the games playing at the moment, but I'd like to see how the Brumbies play against the Highlanders. It's playing right now.
Yeah, I was watching it earlier, and it was a pretty close game. although the Brumbies were looking
So
slightly dominant, but the score itself was pretty close. So
I really like the way that they've been playing over the last couple of weeks, and I think there might be a bit of a dark horse coming out of Australia.
Yep. Mr. Rugby fan says Italy will win the Six Nations in 2021. I bet the return on that bet's pretty high, so it's worth.
I know, Mr.
Really believe it. Put a $5 on that.
I think he comes onto. He came during the World Cup and he was predicting.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks again for your time, Don.
No, thank you.
Good discussion. I think we've covered most of the talking points now. So, yeah, interesting times ahead. But I think just to wrap it all up, we both agree it's probably not viable for the Springboks to move to the Six Nations. It would be a very exciting competition, that's for sure, but it's just doesn't sound like it's viable overall. And SANZAAR really needs to take a good hard look. But the answer is not expansion for expansion's sake. It's strategic expansion and more targeted games.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
That's it for now. Thanks very much for your time again. Enjoy the rest of the rugby. I'm sure there's still more Super Rugby going on today, so a lot more rugby coming. All right, Don. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.